Alain Delon is framed as France's ultimate screen idol, a man whose polished image and lethal charisma masked a life riddled with secrecy, fracture, and contradiction, culminating, per the video, in his reported death in August 2024. Behind the glamour that defined him on posters and red carpets ran a continuous undertow of loneliness rooted in early abandonment, a private ache that contrasted with the myth of effortless seduction. His childhood set the mold. His parents divorced when he was 4, shattering the household and scattering his sense of safety. He was placed with foster parents, only to lose them, a second rupture that taught him how quickly love and shelter could vanish. Back with biological parents who felt like strangers, he ricocheted through boarding schools, expelled again and again for defiance that doubled as self-defense, a spiky armor against humiliation and instability. Petty theft followed, small rebellions that signaled a boy grasping for control in a world that kept moving him like luggage. And the nuns who supervised him saw not a budding matinee idol, but a furious child rehearsing survival. Work in a butcher shop added a grim education. Confrontations with blood, blades, and endings, the kind of tactile reality that would lend his screen presence its unnerving composure. Those experiences concentrated into an aura of cool that audiences read as seductive mystery. On set, that same cool could feel like distance, a man who had learned early to withhold. The video suggests that the very attributes that made Delon magnetic, ice blue calm, surgical poise, a suggestion of danger held in reserve, were forged in those formative ruptures. The expulsions, the petty crimes, the disciplinary jobs, the relocations that taught him to travel light emotionally. Fame, when it arrived, did not erase the template. Surrounded by admirers, he was still the child listening for the door to close, braced for the next separation, guarding himself with elegance and enigma. Thus the contradiction at the heart of his legend, a public life defined by adoration and a private narrative organized around loss. In that light, the video's account of a death in 2024 reads like a final act staged in the key of his beginnings, remote and solitary, underlining how the glamour never fully silenced the boy who felt unwanted. The star remained, but beneath the light, the wound kept its shape, powering performances that invited audiences to swoon while warning them, subtly, to keep their distance. Forged first by the military and then by the streets, Alain Delon's path to stardom reads like a preface to the icy characters he would later inhabit. As a volatile teenager, he faced a court-martial for stealing a Jeep. Given a brutal choice between disgrace and deployment, he chose service in French Indochina. The decision hurled him into a landscape of risk and moral ambiguity, where violence was not theatrical but immediate. Those months hardened his gaze and slowed his pulse. They taught him how to hold still under pressure, to register danger with minimal movement, to let menace travel through silence. Years later, when audiences felt chilled by the composure of Tom Ripley in Purple Noon, or the near-wordless precision of the hitman in Les Samouraï, they were reading the residue of a young conscript who had already watched life and death bargain in real time. Back in Paris in the mid-1950s, Delon's reintegration was more slog than glide. He hauled crates at Les Halles, the city's pre-dawn wholesale market, and drifted around Pagaille, where the neon was cheap, the hours were long, and the line between companionship and criminality was porous. He picked up acquaintances from the petty underworld, learned how rooms change when certain men enter, and how reputation can be currency. Then fate arrived in the form of a look and a recommendation. Actor Jean-Claude Brialy noticed the unknown with the cut-glass cheekbones and suggested he come along to Cannes in 1957. Festivals can be lotteries for the uncredentialed, and Delon won his ticket. Introductions led to tests, and tests led to a first screen appearance in 1958. Almost immediately, the camera understood him. The stillness, the withheld smile, the coiled readiness. That same year, destiny doubled back with a love story. On the set of Christine, Delon met Romy Schneider, already a star yet, like him, disciplined by strict mothers and strict studios. They clashed, then clicked, then detonated into Europe's golden couple, two faces that seemed to answer each other like mirrors. Their romance made magazines swoon, but it also made private weather, jealousy, distance, ambition. Until in 1964, Delon ended it by letter to marry Nathalie Delon, who was pregnant with his son. The gesture was ruthless and atypical, and it broke Schneider's heart, yet the bond between them refused to die. Over the decades, he would call her the love of my life, and the phrase did not feel like public relations, but confession. They worked together again, visited, forgave in fits and starts, and when Schneider died in 1982, something in Delon dimmed that never fully rekindled. Thread those chapters together. The soldier who chose the front, the porter who learned the edges of Paris, the anonymous face spotted at Cannes, the lover who hurt and kept loving, and you get the grammar of Delon's screen myth. Elegance as armor, danger as biography, tenderness rationed but real. The hinge on which Alain Delon's public myth and private turmoil swung was the 1968 Markovic affair, a scandal that fused celebrity, politics, and violence into a cloud that never quite lifted. Stevan Markovic, Delon's bodyguard, confidant, and a fixer with one foot in the demi-monde, was found murdered, his body dumped, and his name suddenly everywhere. Investigators uncovered whispers of a blackmail scheme built on hidden cameras and compromising photographs, allegedly including images of Claude Pompidou, wife of future President Georges Pompidou. Delon was detained for 24 hours and questioned at length. His friend François Marcantoni, a Corsican with a formidable reputation, was charged and spent a year in custody before being cleared. In time, the notorious photos were deemed fakes, crafted with lookalikes. It didn't matter. The episode imprinted Delon with an aura of dangerous proximity to power and its shadows. Plausibly innocent, permanently tainted. What made the story even murkier was its bleed into his domestic life. Delon had secretly married Nathalie after she became pregnant, a union that combined the heat of sudden romance with the cold drift of incompatible temperaments. They divorced in 1969, the marriage battered by jealousy, fame, and a schedule that erased ordinary intimacy. Then came revelations that Markovic had been having an affair with Nathalie, a detail that, in the public imagination, retrofitted motive and deepened the sense that Delon's household, like his entourage, was an unstable orbit of loyalty and betrayal. Their son, Anthony, would grow into a capable actor with a complicated relationship to his father's legend, and later, during Delon's declining years, would be drawn into bitter family disputes that seemed to echo the old fractures. After the implosion, Delon rebuilt his private world around Mireille Darc, a partner whose presence for 15 years supplied the steadiness his life otherwise resisted. With Darc, an actress and documentarian known for intelligence as much as beauty, he found a rhythm that muted scandal into background noise. Friends spoke of her as ballast, someone who absorbed pressure without drama, who let Delon be Delon without stoking the fires around him. Even when the romance ended, the loyalty didn't. They stayed close until her death in 2017, and the grief that followed revealed how much of his equilibrium had been borrowed from her. Later, with Dutch model Rosalie van Bremen, Delon became a father again to Alain Fabienne and Anoushka, adding two more names to a lineage that would ultimately contest questions of care and control as he aged. Threaded together, these chapters show a life lived in concentric circles of intimacy and exposure. A murder that splashed mud onto state politics, a marriage cracked by infidelity and public glare, and a long partnership that proved serenity was possible, if never permanent, for a man fated to carry his scandals like a second skin. Stability, when it finally arrived for Alain Delon, wore the face of Mireille Darc. Across 15 years, she offered a counterweight to the whirl of scandal and notoriety, a companion whose intelligence and quiet discipline steadied his volatile orbit. With Darc, the daily weather softened, fewer upheavals, more routines, a sense that the man who embodied glacial poise on screen might also locate warmth at home. Even after the romance ended, their loyalty held, and when Darc died in 2017, grief exposed how much of his equilibrium had been anchored in her presence. Life, however, kept moving. With Dutch model Rosalie van Bremen, Delon became a father again, welcoming Alain Fabienne and Anoushka. Those years suggested that, however guarded, Delon could still choose intimacy, assembling a fragile piece out of work, parenthood, and the vestiges of fame. Yet the family story always had a missing figure. Singer Nico's son, Ari Bellone, born in 1962 and long portrayed by others as Delon's child, grew up without official recognition from the actor. Delon's mother nevertheless helped raise the boy, knitting him into the wider family even as Delon himself withheld acknowledgement. The video paints Ari's life as a long consequence of that denial. A man carrying the weight of exclusion, haunted by addiction and depression, who died in 2023 still outside the gate. In that telling, Ari becomes an emblem of Delon's decisive boundaries. The same capacity to cut that made his characters unnervingly convincing also shaped his private choices, sometimes with irreversible costs. Late in life, the spotlight returned with a harsher color. Delon gave interviews that placed him squarely in France's culture wars, regretting the abolition of the death penalty, opposing same-sex marriage, voicing support for the National Front, and praising its founder, Jean-Marie Le Pen. The backlash was sustained, splitting audiences who had once agreed on his beauty and craft. Then his body began to fail. After a stroke in 2019, the former icon relied on others, and dependence bred suspicion. A bitter public dispute erupted between his companion Hiromi Roland and his children over access, intentions, and control. In April 2024, a court imposed reinforced curatorship, recognizing his vulnerability and limiting what he could manage on his own. The video's final sequence closes the circle with ritual, a private funeral at his estate, his burial kept close, and the suggestion that his most reliable solace near the end was his Belgian Malinois, Lubo, an animal whose unwavering affection stood where human loyalties had frayed. Taken together, these chapters sketch a late style for Delon's life, steadiness found and lost with dark, new fatherhood with Van Bremen, an estranged son who never received his name, polarizing politics that turned applause into argument, and an exit overseen by courts and family rather than by the solitary will that once directed everything. If the screen taught the world to read his stillness as power, the coda suggests another reading: stillness as defense, love as contingency, and loyalty as the rare currency he spent sparingly until the very end.